On the tarmac at Naha Airport in Okinawa, ground controllers watched in shock as fuel began pouring from a Boeing 737. It was August 20th, 2007. The aircraft had just landed with 157 passengers and 8 crew members aboard. China Airlines Flight CI120 had completed a routine 1 hour and 6-minute flight from Taiwan. The pilots had taxied to their assigned spot. Then, without warning, the catastrophe began. Fuel streamed from the right wing. Within seconds, the pooled aviation fuel reached the exhaust pipes of the right engine, where temperatures were extremely high. A flash fire erupted across the fuselage. The aircraft was engulfed. Yet what happened next defied probability. Every single person walked away alive. To understand how this happened, we need to rewind 6 weeks. On July 6, 2007, China Airlines Flight CI120 entered scheduled maintenance at Taiwan's facility. The aircraft was a Boeing 737 that had rolled off the assembly line in June 2002, and by then had accumulated 13,664 hours in the air. The maintenance teams had a specific job to do. Boeing had discovered a design vulnerability in the wing's slat system, the retractable surfaces that extend from the leading edge to increase lift during takeoff and landing. The problem was in the slat downstop assembly, a small but critical piece that prevented the slat track from sliding too far out of its housing. Over time, the nut that held this assembly in place could work loose and fall out entirely. This was not a theoretical risk. An earlier incident in 2005 had proven it could happen. Boeing issued Service Letter 737 SL 57-084 in December 2005, requiring airlines to inspect and reinstall the downstop assembly with thread-locking adhesive and precise torque. China Airlines assigned 3 maintenance technicians to carry out the repair on the inboard slat of the right wing. To access the slat track assembly, they had to open a small service door that led through the fuel tank. The opening was tight, barely enough space to reach through, but impossible to see clearly what they were doing inside. Working blind in a confined space, performing a delicate assembly job that required precision and care, a critical error occurred. When they reinstalled the downstop assembly, the washer, a small metal disc that should have been placed on the bolt before the nut, was never put back. Without that washer, the entire assembly sat loose on the bolt. The repair work was completed. The maintenance record was signed off. The aircraft was cleared to fly. Neither the engineers who designed the service letter nor the supervisors who approved the job noticed the difficulty of the task or questioned whether the working conditions made error likely. For the next 6 weeks, the aircraft flew normally. Crews took it in and out of Naha Airport repeatedly. Passengers flew without incident. The pilots reported no abnormalities. On the August 20th flight that would change everything, the 157 passengers and 8 crew members boarded as they always did. The 1 hour and 6-minute flight proceeded as scheduled. No one aboard knew that a tiny metal disc was missing from a location deep inside the right wing. No one knew that 6 weeks of flight cycles, pressurization changes, gravitational forces, vibrations from the engines, had been working on an assembly that was never meant to hang loose. The aircraft touched down at Naha at 10:27 in the morning. The pilots began the standard post-landing procedure, retracting the slats to restore the wing to its cruise configuration. As the pilots retracted the slats, the hydraulic actuator began moving the slat track backward into the track can, the hollow space inside the wing where the slat sits when not deployed. The downstop assembly, loose and unattached, had nothing to hold it in place. As the slat track slid inward, it pushed the downstop bolt ahead of it. The bolt, driven by the powerful hydraulic force, struck the aluminium wall of the fuel tank. The impact was brutal. The bolt punched through, creating a hole 2 to 3 centimeters in diameter. Aviation fuel began to escape from the punctured tank, pooling beneath the wing. The damage had happened in seconds, invisible to the crew, undetectable by any instrument they had. The captain taxied to their assigned parking spot. The engines shut down at 10:32 in the morning. Fuel vapor pooled beneath the aircraft, rising toward the right engine and the brake assembly. For 53 seconds, there was relative calm. Ground crews moved around the aircraft. Passengers began to gather their things. Then, Moments after the engines shut down, the fuel vapor made contact with the right engine's exhaust pipe, where the outer surface temperature reached 340 degrees Celsius. Ignition was instantaneous. A flash fire erupted. It spread rapidly across the wing and along the fuselage, the interior filled with smoke and heat. The captain, seeing the fire through the cockpit window, understood immediately what was happening. He announced an emergency evacuation. What followed was a masterclass in crisis response. The captain and first officer moved with practiced urgency. Crew members directed 157 terrified passengers toward the emergency slides. Some evacuees jumped from the aircraft and ran. The first officer descended on an emergency rope, but was knocked down when the number 2 engine exploded in a violent fireball. The captain, seeing his first officer down, jumped from the cockpit window without the rope and ran clear. Both pilots escaped uninjured. Passengers poured from the aircraft. The evacuation was chaotic but effective. The heat was overwhelming. The fire was spreading. Yet within minutes, every single person who had been aboard was clear of the aircraft and moving towards safety. The fire did not stop. After everyone had evacuated, a massive explosion detonated in the middle of the fuselage. The right wing collapsed. The aircraft, burned and shattered, became a blackened hull. One ground crew member sustained injuries. Of the 165 people aboard, 3, a 57-year-old passenger with hypertension and an 8-year-old girl who felt unwell, were transported to a nearby hospital for observation. All would recover. The Japan Transport Safety Board opened an investigation. 2 years later, on August 28, 2009, the JTSB released Report AA 2009-7. The findings were unambiguous. The washer had not been reinstalled during the July maintenance. This single omission had allowed the downstop assembly to fall out over 6 weeks of flight operations. When the slats retracted, the loose bolt punctured the fuel tank. The fire that followed was the inevitable consequence. The regulatory response was swift and urgent. On August 23, 2007, 3 days after the accident, the Civil Aviation Bureau of Japan issued an airworthiness directive. On August 25, the FAA released Emergency Airworthiness Directive 2007-1851. Both mandated immediate inspection of all slack downstop assemblies on Boeing 737 and 737-8 aircraft worldwide. Airlines were required to verify proper installation, apply thread locking compound, and torque the nut to between 50 and 80 inch-pounds. Compliance was mandatory within 24 days. Additional Airworthiness Directive 2007-1852 followed. The regulating agencies had learned a lesson. A design vulnerability in one aircraft had become a systemic risk across an entire fleet. The response was not to wait for the next incident. It was to mandate correction across the industry before another aircraft could fail. Flight CI120 became a case study in how a single oversight in maintenance, compounded by working conditions that made error invisible, could create a catastrophe, and yet how preparation, training, and crew discipline could still save every life at stake. The aircraft was destroyed. The investigation took 2 years, but the 165 people aboard that flight went home to their families. The missing washer had cost Boeing a 737 and cost the industry a painful reminder, but it did not cost a single life. That margin between disaster and survival, between the worst-case outcome and the one we actually got, was paper thin, and it held.